welcome back to Keys of the Kingdom. So we're talking about structure of the kingdom and the structure of the governments of the world and where you go wrong and where you head the right direction. And the reality is you can't make any more of a blanket rule. This is your blanket rule in your Constitution and your personal Constitution or creed, that I have to love the giving of life, the sharing of life, the creation of life, the pursuit of life, and which is to love God, which is the source of life, the creator, the creative force in the universe. And I have to love my neighbor as myself. If you get those two things, everything else should fall into place. If it's not falling into place, it's because those two things are not real. It's just in your imagination. You don't really love those things. And, see, like the water buffalo would come, we talked about in the first show, would come running back and chase lions, face lions, to protect water buffalo babies. Very rare to find water buffalo going and protecting gazelle babies. They'll sit there and like, oh, it's a gazelle. Oh, he's eating a wildebeest. Oh, okay. That's none of my business. They're not a part of my village. So, anyway, so that's what we're dealing with, is this other form of reality where we're all this one village, this one community. And the basis of our community is that we love life and the giver of life and the givers of life, and we love our neighbor as ourselves. And we don't oppress the stranger in the midst. So Moses had a lot of these rules which included prohibitions. Now because if a lot of people are listening to this for the first time and have never heard, I just mentioned Moses, I mentioned Jesus, I mentioned the church. And so they're going to equate all those terms with other people or other ideas that they got from other people about who Moses was and what the Bible says. And just to give you a heads up, I don't believe the Bible ever told us to pile up stones and set sheep on fire. Nowhere in the Bible does it tell us to do that. Now, if you don't understand why I'm saying that, then you have to do some more study. And we have lots of articles that take you step by step that is a fiction and a fraud. And that was well known by one of the most popular groups of the day, mentioned by Josephus and everybody. It's well known that the interpretation that God wanted us to pile up stones and kill sheep and set them on fire is a fiction and a fraud. They knew it was a fiction and a fraud. Sadducees didn't think much of it. The Pharisees were promoting it, but they also knew to some degree, in some groups, knew that it was a metaphor. But they still did the ritual, but that's part of the process of unmooring the ritual away. And so we have lots of articles on golden calves, what it really was, which is a central bank, which the Constitution did not prohibit the creation of a central bank. And see, those 5 things that you were to put in your Constitution, 4 of them are prohibitions. The 5th one is actually sort of a prohibition as well, but it's more general prohibition. You can do nothing to return the people to the bondage of Egypt. That's one of the 5th items that I was talking about. Well, what's the bondage of Egypt? 20% of everything you make, produce, earn, your labor, 20% of your labor belongs to the government. That's the bondage of Egypt. If they can tax you 20% of your labor, you're back in Egypt again. If you don't own your sheep, your cows, you're back in Egypt again. If you don't own your land, if they can tax you on your land, if you only have a legal title to your land. Now see, I just mentioned the word legal. Trey needs to find out what the word legal means, what the word legal title means, because he uses the word legal in his Constitution, but I don't really think he understands the significance of that word. Now, if he wants to take time to get a little bit more of an education, we've got the information, and we can share it with you. But the reality is that all these things start to fit together, and this is the big puzzle. If you don't like the 20,000 puzzles, then you probably don't need to pursue everything that we're trying to share. But if you don't understand love your neighbor as yourself and love life and the giving of life and the creating of life, because I know a lot of guys who, they love life, and they want to go down to the bar and they want to go to the party and they want to, those sheep all love being out when it was nice and cool this morning and wanted to run this way and run that way, go get this grass. And they were, when I was bringing them in last night, they didn't want to eat anything. Oh, we are full, we are tired, we want to go back and lay down. This morning they were wanting to get out there and get something to eat and run around. Sometimes they're just running and leaping through the air and everything, because they were all in such good spirits. Well, I'm glad they're in good spirits, but I don't want them to be eaten by coyotes, so they need to learn to stick together. But I want to mention a Supreme Court case just as a part of your history and understanding, and we gave it a little bit of, I'm not going to give you 4 years of education or 12 years of education or in a single show, so I'm just giving you bits and pieces. If you think I'm missing something, I'm probably not. I'm just not mentioning it on this show. But the Wickard versus Filburn case, which, if you want to look it up, 317 U.S. 111, it's a 1942 case, was an interesting Supreme Court case. Now, this is well after Woodrow Wilson, well after the Civil War, well after the first U.S. bank. This is after the Federal Reserve. You've already lost it. You're not, like somebody asked me once when I was at a meeting, I was lecturing somewhere in the Midwest. I think it was in Nebraska. No, I was beyond Nebraska by then. But anyway, one of those 50 states. And somebody asked about capitalism. And I happen to know Trey Goff, I think, refers to himself as an ANCAP, or at least somebody has, and he didn't deny it, which is an anarchist capitalist, so he's in favor of capitalism. And Christ was an ANCAP by those definitions. We have a page on anarchism if you want to go look that up. All the church was anarchists. Because they were commanded not to be like the governments of the world, the princes of the world and the Gentiles and the other nations. That's what Gentile means, other nations, who call themselves benefactors but exercise authority one over the other. We weren't archists. We weren't rulers. We were forbidden to be rulers. So that would make us anarchists, not rulers. We also can't rule over other people who want to have rulers. They can have their rulers. We don't want to take that away from them, so we're not breaking windows or throwing bombs or overthrowing governments. We may be counted amongst the rebels, and we'll get to that. Transgressors, we see the word transgressor in the New Testament. Jesus, told them, if you don't have a sword, this is a general instruction. If you don't have a sword, sell your coat if you have to, but go get yourself a sword. And somebody had 2 swords. And he says, that's enough. Well, that's fine. But somebody is actually trying to suggest that those were props to fulfill this other prophecy of that we are to be counted amongst the transgressors. And he says transgressor, that means a robber or a thief or anybody. No, it is a fulfillment of a prophecy. It's in Isaiah 52. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's around 52, where it says that he would be numbered as a transgressor. But the meaning of the word transgressor there is the same meaning as it was in Isaiah. The meaning of the Hebrew word in Isaiah was not a thief or a robber, but a rebel. Christ was the people in in the government at that time, which was the one sitting in the seat of Moses, who were the rulers in Judea. There were rulers in Judea because the people said, we want to have a king, and that was a mistake. That was the camel's nose in the door. That was a rejection of God. And now they ended up with rulers like the Pharisees and Herod Antipas exercising authority. There was no king in Jerusalem at that time until Jesus came in and was hailed as the highest son of David. That means he was the king, except for the fact that he was an anarchist king who was not going to exercise authority one over the other. No more taxes under Jesus. Tithes, yes. The tithes are voluntary. You give to the minister you choose to give to. Nobody can force you. They don't arrest you. So, Trey should take a look at what the kingdom of God is before he writes any more in his Constitution. He may revamp the whole thing. And he won't call it a Constitution anymore. He admitted that he wasn't sure what to call it, but that was a common word that everybody used. The word we would use is accord. And everybody doesn't sign the accords. Just the people who get into the government sign the accords. Because everything else is free will. Free will offering. But it doesn't mean that you don't have a responsibility. An elder of the communities at the time of the early church was the head of a family. That's the unit. There's individuals and families. Families are the corporation of God. 2 or more people, no more twain, as if they were one person. So that's the corporation of God. It's the family. If that family incorporates with another family, signs a corporation, a constitution, a covenant, that's a violation of the commandments of God. You're not to make covenants with the people, with any other family. Not mean you can't have, like a mutual contract concerning your cow or what have you. It means that you're not to have this constitutional covenants. You don't need that. But you do need a government, and that government needs to form some sort of body. And that's what the Levites was. That's what the church was. The called out. Remember, the Levites were called out. They were the church in the wilderness. And Jesus had his called out. He says, I'm going to appoint the kingdom to them, take it away from the others, and I'm going to appoint it to them. Now, they were a government, but they did not exercise authority one over the other. So they were an anarchist government. So Jesus is telling you in the New Testament the structure of your government. And Trey needs to find out what he was really talking about, instead of what everybody going to church thinks he was talking about. Now, I'm not picking on the people who go to church. There's some really good people who go to church, and they may be Baptist, Lutherans. I don't know. I'm non-denominational. I don't care about that. I'm just saying, if you're seeking this other form of government, which is what the church was, this other form of government that operates by faith voluntarism, faith open charity, takes care of all the needs of their society through faith open charity, not through forced taxation. This is what John the Baptist was saying, not through force, but through charity. If you have 2 coats, share one. If you do the same in meats. Do the same with funds, money, whatever it is that you want to give, set on the altar, the living altars of stone. You choose to do that. But, what are we supposed to be doing? Everybody sending a check to some, to Summer Lake. You all send me your checks and your money orders, and then I will redistribute it amongst the entire network. I don't want that job. Please. You can support this ministry, but that's completely up to you. What I'm doing the opposite of what you see these big ministers who are making millions of dollars out there flying around their jets. I'm saying you guys, on a local basis, get together with 9 other families, and you start caring about one another, and then you pick a minister who cares about you all, and you tithe to him, and then he tends to the weightier matters. Well, actually, you all have to attend to the weightier matters, but he attends to the free bread and the welfare of your 10-family group. But you can't just think about your 10-family group. You have to care about the next 10-family group as much as you care about your own. As a matter of fact, you have to care about all the family groups throughout the kingdom of God, which is like a net. That's what he says. Jesus says it's like a net. It's a network. So your minister gets together with 9 other ministers like themselves, and they pick a minister. And now you're tying the knots, but the knots are based on faith, hope, and charity, not a constitution. And so anyway, I know this is a lot to get a person's head around, but we're going to continue through this and follow this up to show you how an actual free society is structured as structure and muscles and sinew and spirit, so that it becomes a living creation. But it's a living creation of liberty. And that's what the Bible's really about. But people are under a strong delusion. But anyway, I wanted to talk to you about the Wickard versus Filburn case, 1942 case. You thought I forgot. I didn't forget. So, anyway, it remains one of the most important and far-reaching cases concerning the New Deal, which, we have articles about the New Deal, and of course that's what Herod was offering the people back before Jesus Christ, before, when he was first predicted that he would become the king in Judea. When he became the king, he offered them a new deal. But that was a system of Corbin that was going to make the Word of God to none effect, and Jesus was going to do away with. And that's, of course, why he wanted to kill Jesus. But anyway, and it set a precedent for an expanse of this interpretation of the Constitution's Commerce Clause. And, like I said, right away, right out of the box, they were expanding the Commerce Clause, that it wasn't what was necessary and needed, but what was desired and wanted. Evidently, there's a serious Supreme Court justice that needed a spanking, but nobody was around to give it, and the people were, too busy running around filling their own bellies, and he got away with it. I'm sure there were people who complained. I know little Jimmy complained, but there wasn't enough to complain because they'd already let the camel in the tent by creating that Constitution, which is a seriously flawed document. A great try, but a seriously flawed document. And so what we're going to be doing in the next few shows maybe is going through, we might just use his document, Trey's document, but it could be a lot of other people's idea too as well, so I don't want to pick on him. But I'm doing it out of love to hope that people see what you don't want to do as well as what you want to do. Because what you want to do is really simple, but I need to fill this up. I've got other projects that I'm working on to try to put all this stuff together. But anyway, the goal of the legal challenge was to end the entire federal crop support program by declaring it unconstitutional. That's what they desired. And there was a lot of flaws in the way in which they created that thing, but created this particular case. But Roscoe Filburn was growing wheat to feed his animals on his own farm. He was not selling this wheat to other farmers, nor was he selling it across state lines, which you remember what I said is the Commerce Clause was really about interstate commerce, not intrastate commerce. But it like I say, Woodrow Wilson was already dead by this time. I don't know if he was actually dead, but he wasn't president anymore. And we'd already had a civil war, and we'd already done a lot of other things. See, the Constitution is pretty organic, and your relationship to it is organic, so a lot of things had already changed. You weren't citizens, by this time, you weren't citizens of the individual states. You were simply residents of the states. You were citizens of the United States. So now you were a party to the Constitution, and you were a party to the Constitution because you had signed up for it. I heard in one of the interviews with Trey where they talk about this, somebody, I don't know if they used the word imaginary contract, social contract. A lot of libertarians want to believe, there's no social contract. Where is it? Show me it. Well, go read the book Covenants of the Gods, and you'll know where the social contract is. And so they always like to throw out words like fiction of law, like fictions of law don't exist. Well, adoption is a fiction of law. That was one of the, there's probably better examples, but that's a pretty common. You're not really your father's son. You're adopted. But you inherit. He treats you. You eat at his table. You are like his son. But you're not his son. That's a fiction of law. So you're telling me that fictions of law are fictions? No. Fictions of law are just a way in which to deal with things that are real. It's as if you were, because all the consequences are going to be the same because you're adopted, and that's a fiction of law. But anyway, back to the Supreme Court disagreed with Mr. Filburn. You know, Roscoe was incorrect according to the Supreme Court. It says whether the subject of the regulation in question was production, consumption, or marketing is therefore not material for, and I'm quoting out of this, so I'm not reading the whole case, material for purposes of deciding the question of federal power before us. See, that was the problem. They were attacking that the federal government didn't have the power to regulate this, and they were asking the wrong question commonly, and it's amazing how many cases go up in front of the Supreme Court and they don't ask the right question. But I see the same thing in the disputes between Republicans and Democrats. I hear the Republicans arguing back, and I just see, it's just so terrible because they've forgotten. They don't know. The Republicans don't know what a republic is. So of course they make terrible arguments against the Democrats, and they make huge mistakes. You need to rethink all the way back to the primal man, the natural law. Here we have another problem, natural law. People don't understand nature because they don't live in nature. They don't understand the herds are a part of nature. They don't understand how it all works. But anyway, this back to the case. But even if appealees' activity be local or through local, and though it may not be regarded as commerce, it may still, whatever its nature, be reached by Congress if it exerts a substantial economic effect on the interstate commerce, and this irrespective of whether such effect is what might some earlier time have been defined as direct or indirect. Now, to unpack that whole statement would take hours, but direct and indirect, defined as direct or indirect, this is one of the biggest disputes. Is income tax a direct tax or an indirect tax? Because you only have the power to impose this kind of tax, and it appears to be this kind of tax, and you don't have the power to impose that. The reality is something else, somewhere else, they're not making reference to, has changed. And it's your relationship to the government. So you are now within reach of Congress, and they're telling you. It's amazing. They will tell you, and you're not listening. You're within reach of the Congress, not because it's interstate commerce. And the reason I thought, the reason I'm reading this, I had never read this before, or at least I don't remember reading it. I just read it to you for the first time. But they're telling you right in this case in this paragraph alone, and I was led to read this paragraph alone. I mean, there's all kinds of print in front of me, but that's the one I was led to read to you. Because in there is telling you why there was even a dispute in the Heller case, which is what I tried to explain in the 4 or 5 articles that are the series on Does a Christian Have a Right to Self-Defense. I have it secreted in there. It's in there, but I don't explain the details upon details of why they can say some earlier time have been defined as direct or indirect. Some earlier time before you changed your relationship to the government. And this is really going to go to the heart of Trey Goff's Constitution. If you're signing that Constitution, you're changing your relationship with nature. You do not want to sign Trey's Constitution. And more power to him. And like I said, I'm not criticizing him. I'm just trying to help people see when you're letting the camel's nose in the tent and how basic your government has to be a free government. Because in the state of nature, you're free. Now, you may have arguments with grizzly bears and coyotes and bobcats and mountain lions, but they're also free. So you may need some leverage to deal with them. But even in Israel, you know, we draw these borders of Israel. Israel didn't come in and kill everybody. It did have wars with the established government because the established government saw them as a threat and attacked them. But they did not take over these areas with violent conflict. They simply moved in with a superior system. And eventually there was some violent conflicts, but most of the people changed their ways because they said, these guys are doing great. And they were not to oppress those other people that lived amongst them.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188. Is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on satellite, internet, or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
welcome back to the Keys of the Kingdom. So, we're talking about a lot of different things. You had the New Deal. Herod had his New Deal. FDR had his New Deal. You got LBJ got his New Deal. All these, they were trying to prove that the New Deal was unconstitutional. And the problem is that anytime you're trying to prove that something's unconstitutional, usually the person trying to prove that it's unconstitutional is a constitutionalist. If you think of yourself as a constitutionalist, you probably don't understand liberty, the Constitution, or the law of nature, or all three. Because you don't understand, you certainly don't understand the kingdom of God. Because contracts, covenants, and constitutions, the name of the book that I told you guys should all read, if you're a constitutionalist, it maybe it'll cure you of your constitutionalism. That document is a contract, and thou shalt make no covenants with them, nor with the people where you go, or the inhabitants where you go. So anyway, back to that Supreme Court disagreed with the fact that Roscoe can't just grow weed on his own property to feed his own chickens. That's regulatable. And they state, I'll say it one more time, whether the subject of the regulation in question was production, consumption, or marketing, is therefore not material for the purposes of deciding the question of federal power before us. So the fact that it's not commerce was not going to get rid of it because it wasn't there because of commerce. Saw the same thing in the Gotcha brief. The Gotcha brief, they were going to try to, and their original premise way back at the beginning of this, it was an income tax case, was closer to the truth than what they ended up, they went with that there is no law that states that you have to pay income tax. Well, there is, and it's, but it's not, you're looking at the legal statutes to find out what the law is, because you don't understand the word legal. So again, you're getting into the middle of the forest, surrounded by trees, to try to see the forest. You can't. You have to get up on the mountaintop to see the forest. Because in the forest, you can't see the forest. You can only see the trees immediately around you. So if you're trying to figure out what the law of nature is by looking at the legal system, you're already lost in the woods somewhere. I don't know how to explain it any more clearly, but in the Gotcha brief, as soon as I read the thing, the thing's a phone book. And it was in the days when I was reading all that kind of stuff. I don't want to call it crap, but all that kind of stuff. And immediately I saw these guys are headed for trouble, and I wrote them a letter really quick, longhand, and mailed it off to them, and I got a response back months later. I think I have it in one of my files, where they said that my letter was prophetic. Because the judge said exactly what I said the judge would say. And the judge was right. And same in the IBT case. As soon as I read that, I said, the judge is telling you what the truth is. Now, I don't know if these judges are actually telling you what the truth is because they understand it, but the evil that they represent makes them tell you the truth. You're just not listening, because you're out in the woods somewhere trying to figure out natural law in a legal system. It doesn't work that way. You need to come out and look back at it and find out what was going on. So yeah, they asked the wrong question. And the reality is if they asked the right question, they wouldn't have to ask the Supreme Court. Because the real question is about them. And this is why the Supreme Court makes reference, some earlier time have been defined as direct or indirect. In other words, we're in another time, we're in another relationship with these people, and therefore he can't grow wheat without us regulating it. The same thing with people who producing milk and they want to sell milk to their neighbor. Not across state lines, just to their neighbor. Oh, violation. They say, well, Commerce, I wasn't selling it across state lines. No. You're selling it. They say, oh, well, you mean I can't sell it? Okay. You can't even grow it and drink it if they want to take that right away from you. Because it's not a right anymore. Because you're living in another place. You're not in the kingdom. You're back in bondage. You're back in Egypt again. All the elements of the bondage of Egypt are law today, or I should say legal today in the United States. That might make it a little bit clearer in your mind. You are back in bondage. Legal means to bind. You're back in bondage. And, making reference back to if the states created the Constitution, they can uncreate the Constitution. Well, they can't fire on Fort Sumter, confiscate federal gold. They can't do that. Well, what about debt? Are all of you collateral for debt, surety for debt? Are all you merchandise? Yes. Why? Because of the covetous practices of your parents and you. I mean, did you go to public school? Well, you're in. That you're no longer free souls under God, the Creator, whatever you want to call it. So many libertarians they don't. Oh, you mentioned God, I'm out of here. Well, when I mention God, it may not be talking about the same God that the Pope's talking about, or I don't want to pick on the Pope, or some minister out there living in $1 million mansion. I may not be talking about his God. If he's a jihadist, I'm probably not talking about his God. But whoever is the creator of the universe, this life, this abundance of life on the, whatever did that, whatever power in the universe did that, that's the God I'm talking about. The creator, the giver of life. And if you love that, why are you out there taking life from your neighbors? Why are you engaged in covetous practices? Why are you, don't you know that you will become merchandise? Don't you know you will curse your children with debt? Make them and yourselves a surety for debt? Once you're a surety for debt, you can't just undo debt. And the debt's real, even though the money's not. So anyway, back to this, that's not where their federal power comes from. Not from the Commerce Clause. They, in a way, yeah, but you're the merchandise. Remember, they're regulating you, the merchandise. But he says, even if the appealee's activities be local and true, and though it may not be regarded as commerce, it may still, whatever its nature, be reached by Congress if it exerts a substantial economic effect on interstate commerce, and this irrespective of whether such effect is what might at some earlier time have been defined as direct or indirect. You're the merchandise. That's why they're regulating you. You become collateral for debt. They're not going to tell you that in 25 words, or I did it in less than 25 words. The same applies to the Heller Agreement. If you go back and you read, does a Christian have a right to self-defense? It goes back to the Heller Agreement. So how do you get stuff out of the system when you and all your stuff is surety for debt? Well, that's going to take more of this program, and I probably won't even tell you, because if you can't get into the Holy Spirit, you're not going to see it even if I told you. So anyway, the reality is that when I'm looking at Trey Goff's, I listened to a couple of audios or YouTubes that he was being interviewed, and he's talking about some of these guys trying to create voluntary free societies, libertarian societies, and they're talking about, seascape, doing it at sea, and other people are, making agreements with other countries that we get to have this kind of free zone, in there. We're going to create this voluntary free society within this free zone. And so they're trying to figure out what kind of constitution they have, and then they're all going to move to that place, and, you know, like the Free State Project, etc., or you know, you could do it up in the air, on Mars, in space. You know, Elon Musk wants to settle a free colony on Mars, and the reality is that you don't need to go to a particular location. The kingdom of heaven is not a place. It's a way of thinking. Now, it is a network of people. What you think and what they think, if they come into one accord and think the same thing, they can be that free society, and you don't need to be in another place. You know, now we're going to bypass getting stuff out of the system, because most of the stuff you're going to get out of the system is going to come out of the system when the system fails. You know, when the cow dies, everything that's in the cow is going to come out, including the maggots. And it's going to go back to nature, and it's going to be renewed again in the soil and everything else. The reality is, I don't want to see all of you perish when the cow dies. You know, I mean, what was the dream of Joseph that Joseph interpreted for the Pharaoh? As the 7 good cows come out, and they're all fat, and then 7 lean cows come out. Well, I'm saying, you know, the beast is going to die. But now the question is the spirit in you the spirit of the beast? Because if it is, then you're going to die too. But if your spirit is the spirit of life, then you will live and prosper even when the beast dies. So anyway, that's my prophetic statement for the day. But anyway, you don't need to go to a place. You need to go to another way. You need to think another way. And that's the key element here in seeking the kingdom of God and His righteousness. Because, like I said, Israel, when it came into these areas, it did have battles, but it had it with the establishment only when the establishment tried to oppress them. And they had no standing army. There was no draft, nothing like that, but they had a way of coming together. This is what Rome always feared. You got to remember, all these Christians were armed. Because Jesus says, if you don't have a coat, go get, if you don't have a sword, sell your coat and go get a sword. And this was common that they were armed, but they were always feared to be the transgressor by, you can get it from the writings of people like Marcus Aurelius and others. They feared the Christians because they were afraid that they would rebel. They were only about 5% of the Roman Empire, but the union and discipline, that's what we see in Gibbons makes reference to this in his Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. The union and discipline of the Christian, he actually refers to it as a republic, the Christian community. Because remember, a republic, if you don't remember because you don't know what a republic is not an indirect democracy. There is no such thing as a democratic republic. Those are conflicting terms. Republic, from the point of view of the Latin idiom liber respublica, is you're free from things public. The majority can vote any way they want. You don't have to go along with it. That's a republic. If you have to go along with it, then you're not in a republic. You're in something less than a republic. So I guess we have to start referring to an absolute republic as opposed to not quite a republic. I mean, it's like, you're either pregnant or you're not pregnant. You're either a republic or you're not a republic. And there's a lot of things that people are calling a republic that are not really a republic, as the term was originally used. Because words evolve over a period of time, people think that an indirect democracy, they're also calling that a republic. And I'm sure that if you looked up in a dictionary today, that it would be defined as a republic, or a republic could be defined as an indirect democracy. But originally, that's not what a republic was. You were free from things public in a republic. It doesn't mean things public. It means, but there are things public in a republic, but you have to voluntarily give those things to a body in the republic under certain restrictions or regulations or whatever that is actually forming a body. Because the problem with a republic is it's not a corporation. You don't sign a constitution to enter into a republic. A republic, you're free from things public. You're just in a voluntary society. But that has no status in the law of nations because all the people are not in a corporation. Now, the beautiful thing about that is that if this guy over here does something wrong, you can't be held responsible for it. This is why you don't even want to be what they call a free association. You want to be your association with each other. You want to be free in that, but you don't want to be called in legal terms a free association, because a free association is treated as if it's a corporation, and you can be held responsible for the deeds of others in that free association.
Unincorporated.
Unincorporated association. You know, I was thinking, I'm not saying that right, and I was going to ask the question, and a little voice came to me, said, an unincorporated association is treated as if it is a corporation. Free association, I'll get it right. You can hear me stammering. I'm not saying something right. Free association is you're actually free. It's not an unincorporated legal term. Unincorporated association is treated as if it is a corporation. You want to be only freely associating, and one of the ways to determine that is that when you give something in to this other corporate body, you can call it a corporate body, or this other body, you freely give it, and you give it up entirely, and you don't regulate it anymore. Well, you don't, again, if you want to send all your money up to some pope somewhere or some president somewhere, how are you going to know how it's being handled? What you want to do is be in a very localized, free assembly, people you actually sit down, and you give it to one particular person that is a very charitable giving person, and then he redistributes it accordingly. And then he can report back to you on how he did, and you can watch what he does and how he does with it. So, yeah, you don't want to be called an unincorporated association. You want to be this free assembly. That's what we use, the term free assembly. We also use the word congregation, but a true congregation is a free assembly. But anyway, I was trying to figure out how much time I have before, we're not going to get very deep into, Trey's, Constitution, but a voluntary society, you don't have to sign anything to be a part of a voluntary society. So if somebody's got you signing something, you're probably letting the camel in the tent. We have a document that people can sign that is a matter of record. It's not a contract. We call it a sacred purpose trust. And what it is it's a record of you choosing to give something to somebody. Hopefully you'll give more as time goes on, and you're giving it to that person for the right reason, and he's receiving it for the right reason. But those are things that you have to attend to. People want to say, well, I did this once, and now I should be just in, like I'm a member or something. You're not a member of a free assembly, except when you're assembled. When you walk out the door, then you're no longer a member. You're not in that assembly because you're free. You're separate. When you sign what we call a sacred purpose trust form, you're saying, I'm taking this thing that I have, and I'm going to give it to this person for the purposes of Christ. Well, Christ is not a citizen of the United States. He's not a citizen of Canada. He's not a citizen. Jesus is not a citizen of Jerusalem, even. At least what we call Jerusalem today. because the kingdom of heaven is not a place. So you're giving it to that individual for his purposes, and he's separate from the world. His church is separate from the world, and we'll go into a lot more of why his church is separate from the world. And the church is separate from the free assembly. The free assembly is just followers of Christ. The sacred, separate, that's what sacred means, is separate people. The separate people, we'll use that word, are the people who are a part of the called out. They have fulfilled the terms of Jesus' called out. They're the ones in one accord. The free assembly of the people may be in accord with them, may not be in accord with them. That's a day-to-day, ongoing relationship. That's what you want, not only in the prior time, but you want it in the present. But that isn't what you got. You see, this is what they're not realizing when they're reading the Wickard case, is that something's happened. They didn't realize this in the IBT case, Indianapolis Baptist Temple case. They didn't realize this in the Heller case. They think, actually, some people think the Heller case was kind of a victory because it said some really cool things. But they're not asking always the right question, and so therefore you're not going to get the right answer. Because what's happened is you went and signed something to get something that was provided to you by borrowing something from somebody else. And so therefore you've become a surety, you become cursed, you become merchandise, and if you're not going to address that, you're not going to find a solution. Now the solution is to seek a relationship with a society that is a free relationship, that is a free assembly. That the only bonds that you have in that society are based on faith in life, the tree of life, the giver of life, the creator of life, whatever that is, we call it God. Faith in that, hope in that faith, and charity, and hope in that charity, because that giver of life gave you life. Now you must take the life you have and lay it down for others. And then you will have life more abundant. Let's just look at something very natural. You know, we mentioned the water buffalo. The water buffalo has, there are males and females, and they produce the next herd by the relationship of those males and females. In humanity, we have a herd, but we are one male, one female. That's usually the way we work it. That's usually the best way to go. Some people think you can do something different, but it usually always ends in disaster. At least it always did in the Bible. But the reality is they produce the next generation. And the kingdom of God is from generation to generation. That's what it tells us in the Bible. So again, back to what I was saying earlier. You're an individual, but you were born in a family. That family gave you life. There's a natural debt that you have towards that family, because that family gave you life. And now somebody's going to say, well, I was an orphan. Well, okay. You were brought up by wolves in the woods or something. I don't know. But the reality is that creates a natural debt. And we are given a commandment not only not to make covenants with the inhabitants where we go or with their gods, their ruling judges. Their ruling judges are arches. You're an arche. You're not for ruling judges, so you're not going to make any covenants with them. And we'll go into this more in Trey's Constitution. But the reality is that you do have a relationship within the family because you were created within the family. And that all your rights come from that family. You did not spawn yourself. And so that within that family there is this relationship that you owe to your family. And it says, honor thy father and thy mother. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. But your days will not be long upon the land, and neither will your freedom be long upon the land. This is why governments of the world want to take that responsibility of honoring your father and mother away from you, and they'll say, we'll take care of your parents. That's not the nose of the camel in the tent. That is the camel in the tent.
Visit crosstheborder.org, C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org. The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.